Co-founder and chief executive officer of CliniSpan Health, Dezbee McDaniel is one of my new best friends. Not only has he been a career entrepreneur, he's an alum of Venture for America. Venture for America is a prestigious entrepreneurial fellowship where he worked with different technology startups, and he did it across many functions of business, such as sales, marketing, and operations. Dezbee has founded and or grown startups from inception, as well as consulted with early stage startup companies over the years. His own company, CliniSpan Health, has just touched my heart because of the work it's doing to make sure it is inclusive and equitable for all peoples. Enjoy the conversation. Dezbee, welcome to Ask JBH.
Thank you so much for having me, Miss Janice. Glad to be here.
Oh, it's a delight to have you here. Your reputation precedes you, and it is brilliant. One thing, though, you're a North Carolina native just like me, and I think there's no better place to start than with your upbringing. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I'm from rural North Carolina, a small town called Eden, North Carolina. And, you know, I would say what you think of as your typical maybe rural experience, right?
We played Eden in high school when I was a girl years and years
What?
ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm from Tarboro, you know. And so we used
Wow.
to play you guys in our conference back then.
Morehead High School?
Yeah. But you know, that was back when I was in school, we were segregated. So it was black school to black school. I think you're a little bit different setup now.
Wow. Such a small world. That's such a small world.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, I think of it as your kind of typical rural experience, you know, that you're riding dirt bikes and four-wheelers and you're outside and kayaking on riverbanks and things like that. So that's the kind of background that I come from. Think of myself as, you know, I always said a country boy is how I think of it, right? That's the experience I come from. But I've always had these, I think, big city dreams. And so I think that's what I'm really working towards and focus on is, you know, being in an area like LA, New York, and what that experience is like. And so coming up for me, I feel like that's always what I aspire to. Is like, I'm from Eden, North Carolina. I want to know what New York is like and what Los Angeles is like. So I feel like that was kind of something that drove me and my experience and really my ambitions, right? And I feel like I'm still just acting on those today, that I'm working towards kind of being that big city presence and being able to kind of have my life be in one of those big cities and it revolve around what that urban area is like versus my rural experience.
Well, it sounds to me as though you're really a big thinker and you're thinking beyond the immediate. And I love that. From your time at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, what stands out for you the most then? Because, you know, Chapel Hill isn't a big city, but it certainly gave you a window to the world. It's an impressive school.
Yeah, so coming out of high school for me, I didn't feel ready for the big city. So Chapel Hill actually felt pretty big to me at the time. I think for me, I actually felt out of place as a student to begin my time at UNC. I think I come from, you know, Eden being rural. It's also an impoverished community. You know, my family was on food stamps. And so I come from that kind of background. And I think that made me feel uncomfortable at times, like I didn't belong at UNC Chapel Hill. I think that was one of my first kind of challenges for personal growth, right? Is how am I able to handle uncomfortability, right? So that was one of my first challenges as soon as I stepped on campus. And I've grown to throw myself in uncomfortable situations because I found the most growth there. So that's one of the biggest lessons I took from college at UNC Chapel Hill. Another big experience for me was actually the entrepreneurship minor at UNC Chapel Hill. So while it was a minor, it was actually the most impactful academic experience I had. And it was because it was experiential. We would go and actually do things versus most classes. I would read in a textbook about actual event happenings, and then they would test me on how well I could remember what the book said. Versus with the entrepreneurship minor, It would teach us things about how to listen and understand when someone has a problem, and how to ideate about solutions and actually put that in front of them and get direct feedback. So the concept of direct feedback and experiential education was really new for me and exciting and impactful for me. So I think those are two things that anytime I'm talking about my college experience, I always talk about those two things: how uncomfortable I felt and how I finally found a level of comfort to be able to stay within the community and gain value from it and create value for it. And really how that entrepreneurship minor was so impactful for me. And I think is a huge reason that I'm sitting here chatting with you today.
That's beautiful. You know, that certainly had to have fed into it, along with, I'm sure, so much else that happened in your life. Here's the thing, though. You're currently a tech entrepreneur, and your company, CliniSpan Health, is a software platform that helps to access clinical research. You also provide patient recruitment to communities of color. How was CliniSpan idea born?
Yes. That's a great question. So it was born out of kind of a two-part anecdote, right? So I have been a tech entrepreneur my whole career. I was in a fellowship called Venture for America. That was a great experience for me. I worked in startups, so was an early team member with other tech startups, able to learn from founders, network with founders. So that was a huge part of it, right? So the entrepreneurial bug had already bitten me in college. I then went into Venture for America, and I knew I wanted to start my own company. And actually the reason, just kind of a step back, the reason that I decided to be an entrepreneur, one concept I heard in college that has stuck with me to this day is that organizations are the biggest change agents for communities. So when I learned that and believed in that idea, I decided that I had to start, develop, and grow organizations, because that is how I could then impact my community. And so that is what I went into college and this fellowship knowing that I was trying to get the quickest path to starting my own company. So along with that ambition to start my own company, my aunt was actually dealing with breast cancer. She thankfully beat it. But in her post-chemo experience, she was taking post-chemo medicines. And even though doctors assured her she would not, she always saw the rarest side effects. So at that time that I was actually searching for the company I wanted to start and grow, I had this familial experience with my aunt that really impacted me. And I wanted to figure out how I could solve that problem on a systemic basis, where my aunt would then have medicines that affected her more acutely. And so the ambition that I was acting on, along with the impact that created for my aunt, really helped me to decide that I wanted to focus on equity in healthcare, and specifically equity in clinical trials and drug development. And so that was really the motivation for me behind CliniSpan Health.
I love that. And there's so much that we want to dig into in there. When you talk about equity in healthcare, for our family listening who may not be as aware of historic racial health study disparities, explain that, please.
Yeah, so to break that down simply, I'll give some data points. So the US currently is made up of about 40% people of color. That's across all the minority, racial, and ethnic groups. But the rate of inclusion for people of color is as little as 2 up to only 16%, which means that there is not fair representation in a drug trial, let's say ibuprofen, even, for example. So when you and I take ibuprofen, Janice, for example, we might take improper dosage amounts and see inadvertent side effects and have overall lower health experiences with a drug, simply because more people that look like you and I were not in the trial to test the drug. So that really is the problem that we're addressing. And that has been a long-standing problem that we are trying to leverage technology in order to solve now.
And this challenge that you're meeting, especially with equity in the health arena, is not just one that is owned on the side of the manufacturers, the developers of drugs. It also exists in communities from places of
Yes.
distrust or previous experiences. You're
Yes.
familiar with Miss Evers' boys, right? And the
Yes.
other specifics that might come to mind in there, such
Yep.
as women. I think it's important to share where the community is that you're looking to serve on this trust or this absoluteness around their health.
Yeah. So we actually are doing what we feel is a novel concept. So we're actually leveraging for the clinical research industry. So we like to think the first and only company actually leveraging influencer marketing for clinical research. So to your point about where people in these communities are, they're now in digital communities, right? They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok. How do we meet them there? So these pharma sponsors that we work with as customers have not adapted their content and marketing strategies to communicate in culturally competent ways via social media. So CliniSpan Health has taken a digital community approach where we create content and meet people on the channels that they want to be met on with this content. And so we're really, how we think of this is we're taking kind of clinical research's legacy marketing approaches, and we're updating them to the digital communities and infrastructure that we have with social media tools today.
Dezbee, let me ask you this. And based on your opinion, what are the key factors that have contributed to the lack of diversity and representation in the clinical research field?
Yeah, so we do have data around this. We actually have been doing our own internal studies with a few partners to understand these discrepancies more acutely. And number one, frankly, is trust. The word we've used a couple of times is from experiences like the Tuskegee syphilis study, from experiences like the Henrietta Lacks DNA situation.
And share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Tuskegee syphilis study was a study done at Tuskegee University around African-American men who they were trying to see how they could cure syphilis. And these men actually during that time, they found the cure for syphilis during this study, but they did not actually introduce it to the men because they wanted to keep them as study subjects. And so they didn't make them.
When you say they didn't introduce it to the men, you mean the men were duped about what they were participating in?
Exactly. So they were misled about.
They were not aware that they were being injected with it.
Yes, exactly. So they were misled about having found the cure and never having access to that cure and staying a part of this study that was a longer period of time. And a lot of those men actually died as a result of not receiving that newly found cure. And with Henrietta Lacks, they actually ended up keeping her DNA, and her family had no knowledge of this. And they were continuing to use that DNA as intellectual property and other developments that they were making. And the family, again, had no knowledge of this and were getting no kind of benefit from this. And so those are the types of situations.
And the Henrietta Lacks study worked in the field of care for.
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
Share with us what Henrietta Lacks study actually meant to the world in terms of medical.
Yeah, so it's lost on me at the moment, but I know they were but they were developing a lot of medicines that they could use to cure a lot of diseases within people. And again, I think the issue was that the family had no knowledge of this, and they were using someone's bodily intellectual property or bodily property to develop drugs without creating value for that individual or their family and estate, right?
In each of these instances, you're talking about African Americans who participated in the advancement of medical treatments without knowledge of how they were participating, nor any representation back to their families or communities in a specific way for that. That's what you're describing, and that is the platform in some ways for why there is a mistrust of the medical
Yes,
community by people of color, not just
that's
Black.
exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Because people don't want to go through similar types of experiences, right? They don't want to get into studies that they are used and abused in any ways, but especially ways that are not made privy to them or that they understand.
So
What is
Des, if we
actually
move it forward, around how you're working with CliniSpan Health, then you are looking at ways to actually engage these communities,
yeah.
especially the younger members of the and the digitally engaged members of the community in their own health. How do you then envision the future of digital health, and what is it that CliniSpan Health is going to do to impact this?
For sure, for sure. Great question. So one thing that actually came out of experiences like that is informed consent. So that isn't a CliniSpan Health specific thing. That's kind of a clinical trial process innovation that has happened since things like the Tuskegee syphilis study, where any patient going into a study has to sign informed consent documents. So they walk you through every part of what you'll be experiencing with this clinical trial, whether you'll take placebos, whether it's invasive or non-invasive, and all of those aspects. That was not something that was present around the time of the Tuskegee syphilis study. So that's one kind of industry improvement that has helped to create more trust, because they actually give you all of the information. Now, what CliniSpan Health does is we kind of expound upon that. So we leverage the influencers in social media to educate the community about these changes. So we educate them about the fact that informed consent is now a part of the process, which means that you can have higher trust. So we act kind of as a guide to the proper education and information to people in these communities, because people, they want to be educated, right? They want to know and understand more. What we saw was the COVID pandemic actually accelerated people's general knowledge around how drugs are developed and how that's important. And so a lot of what we leaned on was the fact that people wanted to know more about the COVID vaccine and understand how vaccines are developed, how that could be developed so quickly, and all of these other things. And so we act as a guide in education is how I think of that, that we point you to the trusted platforms and content so that you can learn about clinical research and make a proper decision with having all of the knowledge and trust and confidence in making that decision.
I love that so much. And as a matter of fact, we talked about being fellow North Carolinians. One of the key figures in the development of the COVID vaccination is a North Carolinian herself, and happens to be African American.
Yes, Kismekia Corbett. Yeah,
yes.
We actually, I think, she was on an Afrotech Future 50 list last year, and I was on it this year, and I happened to see that. So yeah, shout out to North Carolina again.
Hey, well, many entrepreneurs today are younger and younger and digitally supported in the development of their companies. Are there any challenges that you faced while building and scaling CliniSpan Health that can become lessons learned and shared here now?
Yeah. I want to say there are so many. I think I'm thinking about what are the best ones to share. Maybe not cliche, right? But there is one that I think comes up quite a bit that is just very real of a struggle for me at the moment. Fundraising. So I think fundraising in general is its own challenge. I do think fundraising as a Black entrepreneur, I think sometimes does present its own separate challenges. So I think I think you want to be very prepared for a lot of emotional work. I actually think that's not an aspect of fundraising that people talk about, is how do you handle the rejection? How do you handle the no's? Like, what are the personal conversations you have with yourself to come back the next day and still talk to 3, 4, 5 more investors that most of them are going to say no, right? So I think that's one big lesson, is that you need to be really prepared for that. And you really need to be ready to do the emotional work and the personal work to be your best self in the business. I don't think that's discussed enough. Kind of the vulnerability that you have as a founder who's raising funds, and how you have to, navigate all of these things. So that's one big thing that I'm currently experiencing.
Before you leave that point, Dezbee, because it is a huge one, and it continues to be one for people of entrepreneurial nature, regardless of whether they've started their companies or not. I do want to make point that you and I can connect after this conversation on someone, Dr. Rodney Sample. Dr. Sample's company has been awarded a grant that actually is a federal grant, allowing for investment in tech startups and tech companies. And so one of the things he does that I admire so much, amongst the many things I admire about him, is he works on that principle that everybody isn't going to get a yes from him, but everybody's going to get a positive experience from him when they seek that. And your comment about the emotional work that is required is so important, I believe, because so many people, remember, I'm an entrepreneur and I was a startup, and I continue to be a startup entrepreneur because I continue to innovate and develop products that go to, and services that go to market. But I think you're hitting it dead on, is that so many of us, as we're building that thing that we're going to take to market, we're not taking care of ourselves in that process. Yes. And so when we get those rejections, it's not only a personal rejection, it's, oh my God, is this thing going to die right? So yes. I really would love you to walk through where you handle that over the next 12 to 18 months. And let's come back and talk about what you learned from it, because I think it is a conversation in and of itself that is so important. Sweden has still, I think, the highest per capita entrepreneurship of any nation in the world. And yeah, we may want to look at, what's happening there. Now, that country is a strong supporter for entrepreneurship in a different way. But you hit something that's really important. Are there other lessons learned at this point, being that you are such a sound company in such a quick way?
Yes. I would say don't scale too fast. I think that's something that we made the mistake of earlier. And I feel we have now since recovered from that, I think. But for some amount of time, I know at least maybe a quarter, we were not sure. And we thought that may have been the wrong decision because just as quickly as things were going up, they could have gone down. And we really felt that we should have just been more methodical. We should have been more methodical. We should have did more customer discovery. We should have been paying more acute attention to the data. So we started combing through all of these things we should have done before actually trying to scale what we were doing. And so I would just caution people not to scale too fast. I think that there is a lot of value in figuring out your foundation and then charting your magnified scale, right? That going from 10 to 1,000 is better if you understand how to go from 1 to 10 as acutely as you can, right? So I think that's something that I would caution people to do, is not to scale too fast. Really feel like you have a grasp on your foundational parts and aspects of the business before scaling. Because once you scale, some of that foundation is going to get rocky and shaky, and you're going to have to come back to make it solid again, right? So I think, again, the better that you can have that foundation established, the less rocky it'll be as you scale. So that's another thing that we've been dealing with, but I would say are maybe on the upside of that experience at this point.
Yeah. And, when you think about entrepreneurship, so often it's not just that great idea that you have. It's also those idea infusers, the people in your community or in your family who have been important to you. From a very personal level, I know you mentioned your aunt's challenges with breast cancer were highly informed how you went about developing and why you developed CliniSpan Health. But has there been any one person in your life thus far who's been a huge contributor to helping you define who you are, especially as an entrepreneur?
For sure. So I did feel to bring this up earlier when I talked a bit about my upbringing, but I was actually raised by my dad as a single dad with my sister and myself. And I think that's not maybe something you see often, at least in that gets coverage, right? It's single Black fathers, I think, who do a great job of raising and molding and guiding their children. And I think my dad is a pillar for me. I think he is, the person I aspire to be in so many ways. And the person that I look up to, that motivates me, that guided me and continues to guide me. So I think he is the person that I would speak to that has really helped define who I am and who I want to be. He really, some of the things he did when I was growing up was really just push me to be a community leader, push me, he let me know that I represent communities, I represent, African Americans and males and all these other different identities. I represent that group. I was in, AP classes in high school, and I usually was the only Black student, in my classes. And something that he always told me then was, that those people in that class might develop how they think of Black males based on how they experience you. And so you have to remember that you represent more than just yourself when you're in that classroom. You represent me as a Black male, you represent your uncles, your grandfather, everyone else that you might know. And so I think he developed this community leader mindset in me from an early age that I just continue to try to act and grow on, I think, at this point. And even doing things like pushing me to speak. I remember, so I had pretty good grades growing up. And my dad would always have me talk to other students who were my peers, right? These were people I had was in the same grade level with, but he would have me go speak to them about how to improve their academic outcomes. And so, I remember being uncomfortable with that to start and not actually feeling like that was my place and that I was called to do that. And today I speak in front of people all the time. I'm doing it at this moment, speaking about advice and helping to guide others just based on my experience. So everything that I am today, my dad planted seeds for. And I think I've just done a good job of watering them and growing them.
Oh my goodness, I'm working very hard to hold back tears of joy and also poignant ones. So often when we see African Americans and people of other ethnicities and cultures as well. In particular, though, African Americans are, hi, mom, thank you, God, thank you, mom. And to hear you give accolade to your dad as a Black father it's touching for me as well. My dad was hugely instrumental in our family. Mom and dad were very much in love up until the day that he passed away. And so I had a mom and a dad in my home. The point I'm making is I had a Black father who was very active in our families as well. And that is not something, not only that is talked about in a healthy way, I think it's not even believed to exist that often.
That is the worst part for me, I think, Ms. Janice, is that people don't even think that exists. And so I always take my platforms and my chances to share that it does, and that my dad is one of them. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that here today for sure.
Here's to your dad. I'm drinking tea. I don't know what you're drinking. You have
got water. Here's to him.
Here's to your dad. And listen, the name Dezbee rings from my tongue so beautifully. Is there any history or any story to your name?
So it's funny, I'm actually named after my dad, as far as we have the same first and last name, but different middle names. So I'm not a junior. So I think that's always interesting. My name is Dezbee McDaniel. His name is Dezbee Tyrone. His is also spelled with an S, and mine is spelled with the Z. So my mom, I feel like, was really in himself are really creative about these nuanced differences. But actually, his name. So my grandfather was in, I want to say, the Vietnam War. He had a friend in the war named Dezbee. And he actually died. May he rest in peace. And so I think one of the kind of parting gifts to that friend was actually naming his son after him. And so that is actually where our name comes from. And it was passed to me from my dad.
And was the soldier who died in Vietnam, was he African American, the one with the name Dezbee?
So I'm not 100% sure. That's, now that you ask me that, that's not a detail of the story that I've ever actually asked or been informed about myself. So I think I'm going to have to take that question to them, actually.
Do. The reason I asked you was purely of a personal note, because I know that, and I'm sitting here old enough to be your grandma, right? We're several generations apart, if generation is considered to be 20 years, and yet our experiences in the parts of North Carolina we grew up in were very similar. So while many things did change from my generation to yours, many things remained the same. And you're sharing reflection on soldiers dying in Vietnam. I remember conversations and actually experiencing it myself, Dezbee, where so many of the young men who went to school with my siblings didn't come home from Vietnam as well, African Americans who were sent there. So, the community got kind of wiped out in a big way. Yeah. And that's another thing that I don't think we've done a big job on, necessarily an important job on, is sharing the many African. We talk about the African Americans who through slavery built the economy and the stability, early stability of the United States as a nation. I don't think we've done as diligent a job in talking about those who also provided so much of the foot soldiering in the later wars. And Vietnam is the only one I think we declare to have fought in a war of, of our introduction. So that's why I brought it up. But you're doing so much that I know your dad is proud of, and that your family, you and your sister and your dad, appear to be a very close relationship. How are you defining success? And is your idea of success the same as his?
So I would say immediately no to, I think my idea of success is totally different than his. The thing about my dad, I think that I find interesting is he is a very content person. He's very easy to satisfy, very easy to make happy, very easy to, I think, find common ground with. And I think I'm the opposite. Like, I feel like I'm always thinking about things in such a large way. I'm always trying to shoot for this goal and that goal, and I'm never content. I'm always searching for the next thing. And so I think those are some differences that I've noticed about me and my dad that ultimately definitely make us define success differently. I think for him,
So let me challenge you a little bit. If not challenge, allow me to have you think that out loud a little bit. May I be Auntie JBH for a minute?
Please do.
Okay, I'm Auntie right now. When you say your dad is easily pleased, perhaps your dad is simply pleased. And by that, I mean, Dezbee, our history as African Americans, particularly in the Eastern United States, which happens to be one of the lowest income per capita areas of the United States, many of us learn to find small pleasures. And by that, I mean, you've heard recently, and you're hearing currently, a lot of conversation on mental health. One of the ways African Americans have historically kept ourselves from wigging out is to find those things and be dynamic about those things that we could find pleasure in. When you live in a world where it feels that everything is working against you, politically, economically, and to a point that it starts to work against you spiritually, right? It becomes important to have a balance. You can't be so unhappy. You can't be so held back. You can't be so bridled that you continue to have a great experience as a human being without having something to counterpart to that. And so small pleasures, for many of us, it was working in the fields for white people by day, but also tending a small garden, even if it was only 4 by 4 feet, for ourselves. You know, it may have been creating songs. It many different ways we find it. And so we it's not that we're contented with our lot in life so much as it is we find a way to enjoy a gratification or to have honor a place we are. So it is a celebration of your dad's generation and your granddad's generation that you have the luxury to be ill content with things as they are. I don't think your dad is so much happy or easily contented as he has found a way to enjoy his own mental health. And I would guarantee you he's far more impatient for your success and the things that would deny you opportunity than he was for his, because of his realization of the reality of where circumstances were in the eco and political circumstances he was growing up versus those you're growing up in. Does that make sense to you?
That makes total sense. I mean, when you paint the picture that way, like, you know, I think that makes total sense. It's like that there's just so much burden on, you know, because I think about it even today for me, I think that sometimes I feel so much burden maybe as a Black man in society that I don't even want to get up and take steps because someone's fighting me to not take a step in that direction. And so I think I heard it in a way that is like he finds simple pleasures to be able to deal with the mostly non-pleasurable situations that life, you know, puts him in, that he has to be in. And I think that makes total sense. And I would agree that, you know, even based on conversations I've had with him, that what you're saying is true. That he talks to people.
There's a book by an author of long deceased, Lorraine Hansberry. I don't know if you're aware of who Lorraine Hansberry is.
Not.
Okay, she's a Black female writer, and her book is called A Raisin in the Sun.
Okay, I know A Raisin in the Sun.
Yeah, A Raisin in the Sun was taken to theater twice. I think Diddy did it last, but don't let me call out names and be in error here, okay? But dynamically, there was a movie made of it, and Sidney Poitier played the male lead in it. In the book, there is a matriarch called Mama Lena, and she has this simple plant that fits in a pot that can center in the width of how long my hands can hold. And Dezbee, this plant sits in her window of her kitchen. And she and 3 generations of her family live in this one apartment. And the story tells their life moving from her husband, who had an insurance policy that they were able to have delivered, and how they use that to move their circumstances out of an apartment into a home. Mama Lena would appear to be a faith-based, gospel singing mama who was just happy and thought her family was doing just great and loved her husband, Walter Sr., who left them the legacy of an insurance policy. Her son, Walter Jr., is highly impatient to get his life moving by owning his own business and no longer working, in his instance, for the white man, for the man, I think he called the system. He called it the man. He has a sister who is being educated at college, and she's having all those different experiences, meeting people from different parts of the world than her tight little apartment that she and her brother and his wife and their son and her mother share. And so, without giving the whole story, because I encourage you to read the book before you watch the movie. The movie is an old movie. I believe it's in black and white.
Gotcha.
And it's one of Sidney Poitier's best performances, I think, ever. But it wraps itself around, I think, symbolically the circumstance of Dezbee, your dad, where Mama Lena is actually the activist. Even though she doesn't have the loudest voice, she has the strongest voice in that family. And it's her ability to find simple pleasure in supporting her family forward that allows her daughter to study to become a physician or a dancer or whatever she chooses, that allows her to keep her daughter-in-law from making horrible decisions around more horrible circumstances of their lives, and importantly, allows her to keep her faith in her son, Walter Jr., as he explores his opportunity toward entrepreneurship. You're going to see a lot of synergy from that book and your life. And I just encourage you to read it and to enjoy it and come back to me and let me know what you thought of it.
I will 100% do that. I feel like the universe just made it where I absolutely have to do that. So that will 100% get done.
Well, let's talk about this. In some interviews, you've mentioned, Dezbee, that you're passionate about tech and about helping others become tech entrepreneurs. You've shared some of the challenges and lessons learned. What advice do you give to aspiring entrepreneurs?
Honestly, it's all mostly simple advice, because what I found is it's mostly actions. Just do it. So that's just the first piece of advice is, if you have an idea, do it, act on it. I always learn the most when I take steps, when I take action. That if I have a new idea and I don't know if it's going to work, I can't sit in a room and say yes or no, it will. I have to actually put it in front of people, get feedback, make those changes after insights, do it again 100 more times maybe until it's, I tinker with it properly. So that's just my advice. Number one is just do it. I think that's the biggest downfall that I see when I have discussions with people who aspire to be an entrepreneur or start their own thing, is just that they spend more time just actually asking people about their opinion of whether they should do it or not, or getting advice. When I'm like, okay, you've gotten lots of advice. When are you going to actualize and act on some of said advice? And so I think that's just number one. Secondly is you need support. I think you do have to start if you don't have support. I would say there have been times where I felt like I was the only person who had this idea and was acting on it. But I've noticed that as you go on your journey, people get bought in at different points. That you might develop your very first product. Someone who you talked to a year ago, you didn't have anything, you have a product now, they love it, they want to be an advisor, they might buy in now. And so I think be willing to go at it by yourself, but always be looking for and open to support as you're going on your journey, because you're going to need that. Whether you aspire to build a company that goes public in IPOs, or whether you aspire to build a family consulting firm, you're going to need support. And so, always be on the lookout, I think, for fitting support. Those are two big pieces that I would give. If I was to give a third one, it would be around skill set. It would be around skill set and mindset, actually. So I think for entrepreneurs, that the way I think of entrepreneurship really is that you have a certain mindset and a certain skill set, and you leverage those as tools on your entrepreneurial endeavor. So with that said, I think you can be intentional about how you develop the way you think as an entrepreneur and the skill sets that you leverage and how those are married together. I think for myself, I have a lot of soft skills. I think I have good communication skills. I I also have the mindset, I think a resourceful mindset that I can do a lot with a little. So those types of thoughts and skills, I think, are married together in CliniSpan Health, right? Where we are communicating to people about clinical research and why it's good for them. We are a startup, so of course we're resourceful and we do a lot with a little. So I think, speak about how my mindset and skill sets are both present in the business that I'm building. Because the brands that you build are an extension of you. And so I'm trying to understand, how does CliniSpan Health reflect Dezbee McDaniel, and how does Dezbee McDaniel reflect CliniSpan Health? Because the better that I can make those overlap, I think the more impact and growth that I can see.
You know, that's beautiful, and it does occasion another question for me, for you. And that is, many entrepreneurs along their journey are tasking so deeply inward that they are not considering what their voice means to the system at large. Now, you've developed a voice that's highly valued, especially in the healthcare systems. It's not everyone's mission to be a voice, even as they are building their business. What's your perspective on that? And for newer entrepreneurs who would like to have their journey be a part of a larger conversation, where do you guide them?
Yeah, so that's a fair point. First of all, that having a voice might not be everyone's role. And with that said, I think you play a role that feels comfortable for you, right? That a lot of times, I think there are background operators who help a company like CliniSpan Health grow and create impact that you'll never see their face. You'll never know who they might be. They're just as important to the cause as anyone else. So I think what I would tell that person is that you don't have to be the voice of the movement. That you can help the movement operate in the background. You could be the glue that makes the voice and everyone else stick together, right? So just think about, be intentional about the role you carve out for yourself. That's what I would say. Be intentional about the role you carve out. Because if the voice isn't the role that you play, there is a role that is equally as valuable. You just need to discover it and get comfortable, I think, playing that role.
Dezbee, that is so valuable. I will tell you, you don't get today to pull back on anything you've put out there. Once you put it out, especially in a digital world, it can live long and stronger than you intended it to. And so I think your point on being intentional is very much there. Around the idea of whether or not an entrepreneur has a responsibility to a community beyond the company, the product or service they're delivering, I think is conversation and debate as well. We don't have to have that debate here. There is one thing that comes to mind for me. Someone important in my life has been a man named J.L. Armstrong. And Reverend Armstrong, although he has enjoyed a dynamic professional career in corporate America, valued the work he did in the church. And I don't know if you're familiar with a church called Fame, First AME in Los Angeles.
Yes.
But yeah. And so he continues to minister there, not as actively as he did in the past. And he's a young man. He told me years ago when I asked him to come bless a building that I bought as a corporate office here in Southern California, that, and I asked him, are you going to be concerned about anyone who may see you in the corporate world here giving a blessing to my building? And he said, well, I work at this company. I work for the Lord. And he told me everyone has their own ministry. You need to learn what that ministry is by listening, not by wishing or talking it. And then you can live it more completely. Even before the word authentic had been so beat up that it's inauthentic, he was expressing coming from one's natural self, and therein you'll find your best abilities. Here's the question for you. He did refer to my work as a ministry. I happen to be a faith-based person with absolutely no influence to you. Where do you see faith and tech working together? That's a big question right now for a lot of people. And across the world, many people don't necessarily associate faith as religion. Years ago, Andre Crouch and his sister Sandra Crouch on an album of vinyl called "Take Me Back," um, which was the title song on the album as well. In the front of it, he had a discussion about faith and religion, and he said simply, I paraquote him, that religion is a search for God, faith is a relationship with God. And that kind of served me well in that. So I've met many people across my professional career who have asked me how my faith plays into that, because I've been vocal about my faith and all encompassing of everyone's faith and religious practice. Yep. Where do you see that? Are you seeing it as a part of a conversation for younger entrepreneurs today? And what's your perspective or guidance on that? Not knowing where you come from.
For sure. So I do see that conversation. I definitely see that conversation had a lot. Just literally how you phrased it. It's how does your, I'll say the word I hear more is religion, maybe, or spirituality than the word we use faith here. But so I talk a lot, I think, or hear a lot of talk about religion and spirituality and how that relates to your journey as an entrepreneur. I think they obviously coincide with one another. The way that I think about faith, religion, spirituality is it acts as a guide to the individual that has a relationship, that type of relationship, that it should guide them. It should help them make moral and ethnic decisions. And all of the like there. So I kind of see that the same with the business. Your faith should help you make more moral and ethnic and sound business decisions. Your faith can help you deal with personal issues in the business, like where I talked about earlier, the fundraising, for example. You can get those rejections, and then you can go and have your discussion with God about how that has impacted you. And that conversation might make you feel better at the end of it. So that's you leaning on your faith and your relationships, your spiritual relationships, in order to be a better entrepreneur. So that's really how I think about it. Is your faith is another tool that you have to help you be better and be guided more in the right direction. Sorry, go ahead. Please. Oh, I was just going to say, just like, it could be a wife or husband who also is a tool that you might deal with that rejection from investors, and you might have a conversation with your significant other that makes you feel better. So that's kind of how I think of faith. I think of faith as a tool, usually the largest tool that you have at your hand to be better as an individual and better as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And Dezbee, talk a little bit about this, the idea of whether it be faith or fairness, regardless of where you come from. You're in a high-tech world and you are in a health sector. As we look at health and humanity, oftentimes access to health is the humane question. And so whether it be faith or fairness, how do you apply that to the development of health tech that allows for the engagement or the benefit to a broad community? We started our conversation around the idea that you're looking to create inclusive recruitment of people into the tech and into the health environment, and technology is a huge foundation point for that. So how do you tie those two together, whether it be faith or fairness? How are you tying together the
I think what I'm about to speak about is maybe more directly fairness, but I feel like there's 100%, faith tied into it, whether that be faith from the CliniSpan health side or faith from the patient side. There's faith in a stronger belief of something, right? That I think in our business, the way that comes across is we get feedback from the communities. So a lot of times what happens in these clinical trials, right? I'll use a clinical trial protocol as an example. So a protocol is pretty much a long form document that is saying this is the way this study is going to be structured and operate. What happens is these pharma sponsors develop a protocol that might be fit for African American community. Never once did they go to an African American person to say, do you understand this protocol? Mm-hmm. And so they're developing something for a community that they get no feedback from the community. And so what CliniSpan Health does is we can get feedback from that community about that protocol. That's really where I think fairness comes into play. It's not fair for a group of people who aren't from your community to develop something for your community and never ask your community if this is a fit. And so what we do is we are the bridge between those two groups. The pharma sponsor who has never been in this community who doesn't understand pharma speak, we become that common ground and we help them to understand that in a more layman's terms manner. That's really, I think, where fairness comes in. And, I think from a faith standpoint, without speaking to religion or spirituality, I think our community has to have faith that they can trust our decision making, and that we're making decisions on their behalf that they would make as well. And so I think, like I said, I see fairness and faith wrapped all up in that equation for how we do that in our business model.
Beautifully spoken, and I think with intention. So whether it be faith, spirituality, experience, or just the incredible success of CliniSpan, here is the question I have for you. Are you looking at launching any future companies soon?
Yes, I would say soon is to be determined. So I'm very focused on my journey with CliniSpan Health right now, and creating impact through this company as a vehicle. I do see myself as a serial entrepreneur. I do plan to launch other ventures. Actually, after CliniSpan Health, I would like to do something more creative. And so I think I'm going to be venturing into some creative lanes, once we have hit what we consider the finish line for CliniSpan Health.
Well, remember, I offered to introduce you to Dr. Rodney Sample and his beautiful wife, who are, I think I may have mentioned, let me make certain I mention, are looking specifically at startup tech companies in North Carolina. So I'll look forward to introducing them to you. Before we say goodbye, we got to go 4 for 4. I'm going to ask you 4 questions to which you'll give me 4 answers. There are no wrong or right answers. Well, all the answers are right. Let me say there are no wrong answers. And the first one is, you get to invite 4 people to dinner from any time in history to present. Who's at your table, Dezbee? And why? And why?
I would be remiss if I did not have to first answer Miss Janice. I would love to have you at the table. But no, really, I actually was talking about an experience from a personal standpoint. Regional F. Lewis, I've read about him being one of the first African-American males to build $1 billion company. I actually have read about you as well, being the first African-American woman to do that. That was actually something that was really inspiring to me. And so I actually would put you and Regional F. Lewis as the first 2 people at that table. So yeah, that I had to put that out there. I think the other people I would name, I would be honest to say Jay-Z. I would love to have dinner with Jay-Z. I don't know if you've seen on social media where they ask $500K or dinner with Jay-Z. I think I might would pick dinner with Jay-Z, although most people would call me crazy, but knowledge is power. Who else would I add there? I think I would definitely pick Michael Jordan. I love Michael Jordan. I grew up a Michael Jordan fan. Going to UNC is the same school as Michael Jordan. So I would love to chat with Michael Jordan and probably ask him some of his trash talk stories. I feel like he's like a top trash talker. So I would be interested in learning more about some of those stories.
And he's deep up in that NASCAR. He's a serial entrepreneur as well. Actually, you'll get to meet, let's see, you said Reggie, you won't get to meet him unless you meet him later. We'll get to meet, I'm sure, after we finish this podcast. I'll talk with you about where that may be an opportunity. And with Jay-Z and with Big Michael, I think you'll meet them. I think what you're doing will be of interest to them. And they are, remember, they are entrepreneurs. They had their starts in sports and in music, but their interests and their intellects expand beyond those sectors. So I think you'll get to meet them as well.
I think you're right. And I think you just made it as real as it could have been for me.
Yeah. So look, let's go 2 for 4. What music, particular by name of authors, are you listening to right now? And why are you listening to them? What are they doing for you?
Yeah, so I listen to lots of rap music.
Tell the truth. Who you listening to, Des?
So I have to say that my favorite artist right now is NBA YoungBoy.
Okay.
So that's my favorite artist. You may have seen some of the things going viral from some of his songs. And J. Cole. So I grew up on J. Cole. He's a North Carolina artist. So
you know, I didn't grow up on J. Cole, but I love J. Cole. And one year at A&T's homecoming, you know my school, right?
Yep. Yeah, G-Ho.
Yeah, G-Ho boo. And one year, J. Cole was there, and I never heard of this young artist. As a matter of fact, he was just coming out. And I was listening to his lyrics so hard. It was the first time I'd experienced music in a convention venue where I wasn't hearing the music so much for the message. And I had to go back and really go, wow, he got some beats here too. But it was the lyrics that I was listening to. You're nodding, or did he kind of, I mean, that's a different kind of approach about him
J.
for
Cole,
me.
I think it was a growing up, it was me and my dad talked about this. It was a certain level of intellectuality in his music that I could appreciate. I think that there were these ways of speaking and thinking that other, I think, rap artists didn't provide me, at least. You know, him mentioning Shakespeare in his music, for example, was something that when I heard that, him taking like classical culture and integrating that in rap music, I think was something that was so novel for me and exciting to me as a person who, you know, I felt like I thought of myself as an intellectual. So those are the things I think about.
He brought a certain academic strength to his early music. I perchance he's continuing to do that. But, you know, when it first hit me, it was very early in his career. When I was growing up, Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder brought consciousness to us. They didn't have huge academic background, but they had strong street knowledge. You couldn't say they had street cred because they became musicians so early in life. They didn't have time to develop street cred in sense of being out there and then rapping about it. But they did bring a community consciousness to their music. As a matter of fact, I would say What's Going On is still one of the most highly relevant pieces of music ever, which is a sad commentary on how we advance as people. But J. Cole brought that academic perspective that gave you that connection from history to present to future. Is that what you felt too?
100%. And to that point, one of the things that I think he did for me, just listening to him as an artist versus others, is like he made college seem cool. You know, he made it seem cool to have a college degree. I feel like most rap artists, you know, are talking about School of Hard Knocks and not skipping college and not liking school, skipping out on school, all these other things that, J. Cole talked about how school was a platform for him, how he went to St. John's to be in New York so that he could eventually then get his introduction to Jay-Z. And so he talked about how college was a platform for his journey and not how it felt like.
Your social security number could be as representative of you as your serial number could.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Without dissing either.
Exactly. Yes. So I appreciated that, I think, quite a bit. Again, especially as someone who was an, aspiring college student and intellectual, and still wanted to, I think, feel like my community was being represented in music, if that made sense. He met all of those things in the middle very well.
Yeah. Who else you listen to? You got to give us 4.
Yeah. So I would say, who else? A female artist that I really listen to, SZA. So I really like SZA. I haven't listened to her new album as much, but I do like her Control album. Who would be the last one?
Why?
Oh, why? The softness of her music. It's very serene, very calming. It creates like just this relaxing feeling when I listen to that music that makes me feel really at ease. And so I would say that's why I really like SZA's music. It's like the sound of her voice and the melodies and all of that, really soothing. Another would be Summer Walker, another female artist. I would say the same, really soothing music, really relaxing. I feel at ease when I listen to it. And so those are really, I think, the reasons why I listen to those two. It's quite the opposite for, I think, J. Cole and NBA Youngboy. It's like an upbeatness and level of heightened energy that I feel from their music that I really like. And so it's kind of spectrum. And I was going to say, I actually make my music choices based on how it makes me feel and how I want to feel. And so whatever artist I choose to listen to at the time, it's mainly me choosing how I want to feel, and their music is a tool to get me there, if that makes sense.
Hey, boo, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things I teach people, including my own executives, is play the music that takes you where you want to go.
Yes.
So, hey, okay, let's go 3 for 4. What 4 books do you recommend to our family that they must read, and why?
Yeah, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I might have heard that a lot, but I think it really shows the counter perspectives, Lily, of if you were raised by, a poor dad versus if you were raised by a rich dad, what are the tools and resources and ways of operating that you learn. That was hugely impactful for me. The Intelligent Investor. I think that just teaches you more about some different financial and economic tools that you can leverage. I don't know quite as much as I would like to by this point. And so I think the level of education that book gave me was really impactful, where I feel like after I read that, I could start having more regular conversations about, stocks and bonds and all of these other financial vehicles that they don't necessarily make you privy to in K through 12 or college, unless, you take a class particularly on that. So those
or unless you go to North Carolina A&T State University.
That too. I did not have the luxury of that, unfortunately. So it sounds like my education was limited.
Well, look, I'm not going to hate on Chapel Hill, actually, because I had a scholarship to Chapel Hill. But then I spent a summer at North Carolina A&T in a project, in an educational vehicle called Project Upward Bound. And
I heard Upward Bound before, yeah.
Yeah, and I got to ask about myself in different ways. And it just encouraged me that was the place for me at that time in my life. Yeah. I'm so happy and proud that you got to go to Chapel Hill, though. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Both of us are representing for the community.
Yes, North Carolina. Okay.
What's your 3rd book you're recommending?
My third book. I think I'm going to go away from maybe the intellectual answers I was giving. And I would say that you should read something fiction. So I'm going to suggest one of any Harry Potter books. So
I probably am not gonna do that, but it's for the family. I'm sure many will.
So I feel like
you can keep that little wizard to yourself. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. That's a joke. Okay. I got great respect for the author as well.
Yeah, so I think just that's one of the all-time favorite book series that I have. Outside of, like I said, books that were meant for education and like knowledge seeking.
Totally get it, and totally support it. And in truth, yeah, you're right. I've read some. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really love Harry Potter. I think, if you aspire to be a storyteller, that you can learn a lot from the storytelling of Harry Potter. It would be the reason that I would say you should read that book. Yeah. Let's see, another book that I would suggest reading. Okay, I'm gonna go back maybe to an intellectual book. I'm going to actually say The War on Normal People. That is a book by Andrew Yang, who was a former Democratic presidential nominee. He actually founded Venture for America. But in that book, he talked about how AI is going to be replacing lots of people's jobs and roles and functions. I think that with the rise of ChatGPT and all of these AI tools now ever so popular right now, that we are actually living the reality that he was trying to forewarn us about in that book. And so I would suggest that book for anyone who would want to understand how artificial intelligence is playing and will play a role in the everyday lives of people. So that would be the reason I would suggest that.
Let me encourage you to read some books by Kevin Kelly as well. Kevin Kelly is someone who I podcasted with, and Kevin Kelly, I won't quote him because I can't remember how to quote him, but the message I got from him around AI and tech replacing jobs was that it doesn't replace jobs so much as it puts different job descriptions in place. And so the idea that jobs change, right? So he has some far deeper thoughts and far many more thoughts. I'd love you to read, because he is a guru on tech, and he is also a person who has a strong spiritual base to him. And he approaches tech and speaks to tech from a place of how it can play not just for humans, but for humanity. And I'd love you to read some of his to kind of give some balance to the idea of whether tech is going to take people's jobs away, or whether it will redefine how people do the work they do. We are getting fewer people on the earth today, and so tech will have a great opportunity to enhance the experience that those who continue on planet Earth have. And I just love to give you that footnote on that.
Sure, for sure.
Albeit I do hear clearly the recommendation of Andrew Yang's book as well. I want to make sure you're fully rounded in what you're looking at there, because jobs and work, both of us live from there. And you're employing tech in how you look to have work performed as well. So maybe consider where Kevin is speaking about, the redescription of work versus the replacement of work.
That makes sense. Looking at it as a kind of a supplemental thing versus like it takes the place of something.
Yeah. One of the things he gave an analogy in the podcasting we did, and it was beautiful. It's a very small thing, but it has a big impact in how you look at it. Photography, he said, was looked at by artists when photography first came out as, kind of a fake thing, and it would it take away the work of artists, when in actuality it enhanced the work of artists, and it added something to the menu. So I'd love you to all, he and I didn't talk about this adding to the menu, but I'd love you to also consider that, you know, I employ tech in my work, you employ tech in your work. I like to think it adds something to the menu versus takes away from it.
Very fair point. Very fair point. I definitely hear that added perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
correct?
Yeah. So let's go 4 for 4. And
Let's
this, 4 pieces of advice you give to our family listening right now. If you give advice that was given to you by someone else, please give homage to the author of that advice and tell us why you think this is important.
Yeah. I'm trying to, again, I think of not cliche advice, but I do feel like any advice I get, the simplest advice seems like the best. The first piece that I'll start with, I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but from an entrepreneurial perspective, you want to do the work to understand yourself as an individual as much as you can, because any business or brand that you build is going to be a reflection of you. If you don't know who you are and understand who you are, it's much harder to know and understand who your brand is and who it should be. That's my first piece of advice, is know who you are, because you then can connect all of your work back to that foundational person. I think that's just something I've discovered in my own experiences, I would say. So that's one piece. The second piece, I'm thinking of a synonym because I don't want to use the word authentic, but be yourself. Again, very simple, potentially cliche advice, but what I found is when I'm my very natural self, and not feeling like I'm playing a role or being someone I don't want to, or someone that I have to be, that the people and things that are around me are for me. You know, that when I'm trying to be someone else, I have people and things around me that are for someone else. So it doesn't fit like it's supposed to. But when I'm my natural, most real and most authentic self, then when I look up, the people and the things that I find around me are exactly what I need. And so, you know, commit to being who you want to be and clear space for that person so that you're not continuing to walk on a path of being someone that you're not, and that you don't want to be.
That is powerful. That is powerful. And I love that so much because you expand on it. Early in our conversation, Dezbee, you talked about wanting to experience life outside of the rural. And when I first came to Los Angeles, I felt so more out of place than anywhere, even than being Black in North Carolina. Okay. And because I felt even more Black, you know, everybody out here was pretty and they carried purses with other people's initials on it. And, you know, everybody was light skinned and all of that. And here I am, this little Black nappy-headed, you know, colored girl out of North Carolina, thrown into this sea of what, you know, beauty and intelligence and opportunity looked like, and none of it looked like me. And I was lamenting on that. And my sister Sandy, who was ahead of me in Los Angeles, and she was light skinned with good hair and beautiful, you know, eyes, and the way you know people, the way you had to look back then. Okay. Before James Brown said, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." He said, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud," but he hadn't yet said, "And I'm beautiful," right? I is kind, I is smart, you know, none of that was going on, boo. And I was just in a flounder. And so I said, no, I can't make it here. I wasn't putting into that equation anything about my brain or any of that. And my sister said to me, "You're listening to other people's ideas of who you are. The most expensive real estate you'll ever own is between your 2 ears. You better make sure you're not letting people live in there for free." And I thought about what she said many times since she passed, and it gave me guidance to how I've thought about opportunities. And, so being mean and not taking on characteristics that weren't natural, nor I'm not talking about not stretching yourself and not growing. Those are very different things. Okay. I'm talking about growing from the plant, from the soil in which you're planted. And, and it was really important to me to do that, because you can lose yourself to the soul of the city. Many people will say, like Lou Rawls, I don't know if you know who he is. He sang a lot about, some people would say cities don't have souls. I think they do, but you've got to make sure you keep who you are intact. So I'm encouraging you. That's powerful. Your advice number 2 is powerful. And this is me playing auntie again, saying, as you continue to visit more and more cities, not just Los Angeles, not just New York, but you're going to visit Shanghai, you're going to visit Dubai, you're going to visit Doha, as you go into these places where they are going to welcome you and they're going to be hungry for what you can bring them. I want you to make sure that you bring them who you are, not just what you have. When you think you're only valued for what you have, you start to lose the value of who you are sometimes. So make sure you bring them both, okay? And it's wrapped up real pretty, so they're going to love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like you maybe inspired me to speak on a third piece of advice is you need people around you to help build you up. I think that's something that cannot go stated enough. That in those moments where you feel at your lowest, there needs to be someone around you maybe that can help you remember who you are, how powerful you are, the impact you create. And I think even from the standpoint of, there are statistics around solo founders, I think performing differently than co-founders, right? My co-founders are everything to me. That when we have hard business problems and I can chat through them with them, that I feel a lot better after that conversation than I felt having a conversation in my own head. And so that would be my third piece of advice is have people around you that are smarter and stronger than you that can help build you up and sharpen you. And that is something that I'm always paying attention to, as are there skill sets, mindsets, or something from this person that I aspire to have? And if so, then I'll spend more time around that person, more energy with that person, create value for them and also hope to receive some. So that would be my third piece of advice.
And number 4.
I feel like you have me trying to land something as powerful as number 2. This feels like a hard task. I feel like, again, simple advice. I think don't get, and we've kind of talked about this, but really don't get caught up in other people's idea of you. How we talked about knowing you, yourself, and your brand. Other people are going to perceive you and your brand however they see fit. That they may, you might think of yourself as a comedian, right? That let's say you do vocational work, you're a general contractor, but you are a comedian who is going to comedy shows on the weekends, and you might identify yourself as a comedian. Other people might see you and identify you as a general contractor, so it's like, just because they see you as that does not mean you are not a comedian, right? And so I think that example just goes to show that you have to lean into, how you see yourself, how you identify, because that ultimately is what's going to define, who you are at the end of your life. How you saw yourself in the actions you decided to take, the decisions you ultimately made are always going to define you, not that someone perceives you as a general contractor when you perceive yourself as a comedian. That won't ultimately define your life. So I think you need to remember that your mind shapes your life and not other people's minds, thoughts, and opinions shape your life.
You know, that may be some of the most powerful advice given on Ask JBH podcasting. Pastor, are you familiar with Bishop T.D. Jakes?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things he taught several sermons ago was around how there are always going to be people who are not going to see you for where you are because they want to keep placing you where you were when they knew you, you know. And for entrepreneurs, that becomes a thing that in your growth, you know, you don't want to forget people and leave people behind. On the other hand, you can't allow people to keep you there when
Yes.
you are here and when you're going forward, you know. So in my company, I often and regularly challenge my executives to consider, well, what got us here, get us there. That lines up with that future growth. I think that was powerful advice, and I am so thrilled you gave it. And as you yourself said, Dezbee McDaniel, it's a simple advice. Sometimes the simplest advice is the hardest to follow.
Yes, 100%. All the advice I gave, I'm always every day still trying to follow it. And I would say most days I might do a good job. Some days I do not.
Well, today you were dynamic in this conversation, of which I pray there are many more. Thank you so much. And from my heart to your home, God bless.
Thank you so much, Miss Janice. This was great.